Hello everybody, welcome to this unit on the free will, the question of free will. This is a very important unit. It's a kind of setup for our final unit of the semester, which is on ethics. So from now on to the end of the semester, we'll be looking at different theories of ethics, or moral action. What's right, what should people do? So all of the question of ethics, moral action kind of depends on what we're doing this week here. On the question of free will and determinism. I think it's David Hume is the one who said that free will is the most contentious question of metaphysics, meaning that for centuries people have argued back and forth over the question of free will. What is it? Do we have it? What does it look like? And so I'll be introducing you to some of those questions. Now, keep in mind that each philosopher defines it slightly differently, and we'll be looking at three different philosophers who have, who summarize different positions. Now, keep in mind that each philosopher I've summarized in this lecture some very basic ways of viewing it, but each philosopher has kind of little tweaks on each one of it. So let's look at the main question here we're looking at this week is, do humans have free will, and what exactly is free will? And as I said before, there are many different definitions, but I've chosen some of them to sum up, to kind of make it simpler for you. And so one of the first questions people ask is free will, does it mean that you have the capacity to choose a particular course of action from some various alternatives, right? Do I go outside right now and play in the rain with my kids, or do I stay in and do my lecture? Now, some people have said, yeah, that's not what it means to have free will, because animals do that, right? Do I run away now or do I stay here? And so it's not anything particular from human beings. But most people say, well, you have to define free will as something particular to humans. We're not talking about exactly the same things, the choices animals will do. It's got to do with this reasoning capacity, and it's got to do with this definition. You've got your will, which is things you want to do, but then you also have free will, which is that ability to decide, do I follow it or do I not do it? So more of a consciousness. That would be that separation between animals. And again, you'll see that your primary text deals with this. And then the other question I wanted to think about is, why do we even care about such a thing as free will? And the big part of that, especially for modern philosophers forward, has been that it's tied into moral responsibility, right? It's got to do with justice, it's got to do with punishment, it's got to do with responsibility. Do we hold somebody responsible? And in what cases do we hold them responsible? And also the other one would be this freedom of action. So, and keep in mind that freedom of action and free will are not exactly the same thing, right? I might have free will in that I decide I'm not going to pay my taxes, but I might not have freedom of action because I might end up going to jail. So keep in mind that there is a distinction. Don't just say, no, we have no free will because I can't avoid paying taxes, I can't drive on the wrong side of the road. That would be too much of a reduction to see them exactly the same thing, right? Free will has to do more with this choice. Do I have a will, and can I choose to follow that will or not? There might be, there are classic examples where people are inside a locked room and you decide, do I want to go outside the door or do I want to stay here? I'll decide to stay here. So I think I have free choice, but what happens if, unknown to me, somebody had locked the door so I really couldn't go outside, right? Obviously I had free will to go outside, but I might not have been free to act because the door was locked. So there are all kinds of cases like that where you end up asking, can you have free will without having freedom of action? Can you have freedom of action if you don't have free will? So we'll explore those questions. But keep in mind that typically only rational agents are legally held responsible for their moral action, right? The wind outside, the hurricane that just crashed the whole town, nobody can punish the hurricane. It doesn't have moral agency. If anybody else went around smashing the towns up the way that recent hurricanes have, they would be punished for it. Same with children, right? You don't punish children in the same way as you do an adult, or the insane. You can be held legally insane, therefore you get off some of the criminal legal punishments than you would if you were declared sane. So obviously this matters for us legally, the question of free will, whether we have it or not. And in big umbrella terms, right, the philosophical problem of free will or determinism is a problem of deciding who's right. There's the compatibilist position or there's the incompatibilist position, and I'll go over those a little bit more. But the compatibilist position basically holds that there is such a thing as free will, and even if determinism turns out to be true, it doesn't really matter because you still have free will. The incompatibilist position says if there is such a thing as determinism, right, if determinism is a fact, then free will is not possible. We can't have both determinism and free will. So that's the sort of the two positions you can hold, one or the other one. So let me define determinism a little bit more. And determinism further breaks down into something we call hard determinism and something called soft determinism. Hard is basically that everything in life, nature, humans, is caused by something else. Whether it's inherited character, whether it's your life history, whether it's current stimuli or restraints. But basically there are these laws of nature which are in place, which makes it so that nothing else could be other than it is. And so you might choose between a couple of choices, but that choice is always determined by some sort of usually external fact. And hard determinant is incompatible with free will, therefore it's known as incompatibilism. And it's basically the idea that the course of the future is determined by some sort of laws of nature and something to do with the past, right? That's that causal determinism or hard determinism. Now, soft determinism is also called compatibilism, and this is, yes, the course of the future is determined by things, but you're still free as long as your own will is one of those steps in this chain of causality, things going. And they do tend to hold that actions with internal causes are free, and you're morally responsible for those actions, right? So if somebody, I don't know, takes my hand and makes me hit somebody, then I'm not morally responsible. But if it's my own thought process that makes me decide I'm going to hit somebody, then I'm morally responsible for that action. And the determinism holds that even though things are determined, I could have chosen to do something else. And therefore I'm responsible for the actions I did do. Hume had this, Thomas Aquinas, and William James, who's one of the ones that you're reading, tend to be kind of compatibilists. Now, libertarianism is the other side of the coin. It's like the flip side. And again, you can sort of split libertarianists down into, they're indeterminists. They think the universe contains multiple possibilities. There is no such thing as this very determined causality between past and future laws of nature. They think that there are some actions that have no cause. It doesn't mean it's completely random chance, but it just means it is not completely caused by something else. And they definitely think that free will is incompatible with a deterministic universe, therefore determinism is false. And definitely libertarianism or indeterminism requires that a human can choose a couple of options under certain conditions. And there's another sort of further branch which would be self-determinists, which again, action has a cause, but the action is still free if it's caused by the person rather than some external preceding causes, right? So if it might be caused, but it's caused by the individual rather than caused by something outside of them, which is why libertarians still hold that there is free will and that you're morally responsible. So I've got a chart up here of the sort of different positions you could hold, with determinism on the side, free will on the top. So either you have no free will or free will. And if you believe there is no such thing as free will and you believe that reality is determined, you're a hard determinist. If you believe there's no free will but reality is indeterminate, you would be an indeterminist. If you believe that you've got free will and reality is determined, you would be a compatibilist, and under that side you could be soft determinist. Libertarianism, though, is that we have free will and reality is not determined, and that would be more of the libertarianist position there. The hard determinism and the libertarianism are like the two poles spectrum, axis, I guess you could say. So that just gives you a quick overview of the different positions you could hold, introduces you to kind of what's at stake in the question of free will. And this week we have three readings: Taylor, Hospers, and James, and they all attempt to answer this question of what is free will, what does it exactly look like, and they will fall into one of these categories here. And what I'd like you to do is read through each of these essays and then try to figure out what your personal stance is, and try to think of an example. The best post that I've seen was where students pick one example and run it through each of the different positions, either a determinist or a free will position, because then it's really fascinating to see how you end up changing your view on if you think a person is morally responsible, should he be punished or not. And just think of the way that Hosper starts his essay, saying if you read it in the newspaper about a murderer, you think, oh, awful man, he should be punished. And then if you read about the poor murderer's background, he was abused as a child and mother ran off and he, whatever sad story you can think of, makes you be more likely to say, well, maybe he just didn't know any better, or maybe he shouldn't be punished so hardly. And therefore Hospers ends up saying that we tend not to hold him as morally responsible when we know the background of. So then that means that we tend to believe there's such a thing as a free will, but we're also at the same time believing that they are determined and they couldn't have acted otherwise because of the background of the person. So I look forward to your posts.